I didn't expect to remember that moment. That's the truth. And it wasn't supposed to become a memory I carried quietly with me. It wasn't some dramatic scene that changed everything in an instant. It was simply a moment, small enough to overlook, simple enough to forget. And yet, somehow, I didn't forget. Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever walked away from something ordinary and only later realized that it had touched a part of you that you didn't even know was listening? Maybe it was a look, maybe a few honest words, maybe the way someone made you feel seen without trying to impress you. I can't explain exactly why some moments stay while others disappear. Maybe they stay because they reveal something we weren't ready to understand when they happened. And maybe that's what happened to me. Because the more I tried to forget that moment, the more I realized I wasn't really trying to forget it. I was trying to understand it. So tonight I want to tell you what I think it meant. I think it began with something I didn't expect from myself. I didn't expect that moment to matter. That's what made it difficult. If something feels important while it's happening, you usually understand why you remember it. You know you're standing inside a meaningful moment, so your mind holds on to it. But this was different. It felt ordinary, almost too ordinary to deserve a second thought. And then later, when everything became quiet, it came back to me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A memory appearing in the middle of an ordinary day, a feeling returning when I wasn't looking for it. And I remember wondering, why this moment? Why not the bigger moments? Why not the things I thought would stay with me forever? Why this one? Maybe you've felt that too. Sometimes the heart notices something before the mind has language for it. We can spend hours trying to explain a feeling that only took a second to appear. And that's where vulnerability begins. Because admitting that something affected, you can feel strangely uncomfortable. Especially when you don't know why. I could have dismissed it. I could have told myself it meant nothing. Just a passing feeling, just an impression. Just a moment that happened to stay a little longer than expected. But here's the truth I've never told anyone. Sometimes saying it didn't matter is easier than admitting it mattered to me. Because the second one makes you vulnerable. It means you have to acknowledge that something reached you. Something slipped past the walls you had carefully built. And maybe those walls weren't built because I didn't want connection. Maybe they were built because as I understood how much connection could mean. When you've learned to protect your heart, you become very good at explaining things away. You tell yourself not to expect too much. Don't read into it. Don't become attached. Don't imagine possibilities. Stay reasonable. Stay safe. But what happens when something quietly touches you anyway? What happens when your heart notices something your defenses weren't prepared for? That's the part I find difficult to explain. Because I don't think vulnerability always arrives as tears or dramatic confessions. Sometimes vulnerability is simply admitting that you care. Sometimes it's saying, I thought about you after you were gone. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to wonder what a moment meant without immediately telling yourself that you're foolish for wondering. And maybe that's why this memory stayed. It wasn't asking me to make a promise. It wasn't asking me to create a future around it. It was simply asking me to pay attention to myself, to what I felt, to what that feeling might be revealing. And slowly I began to realize something. Maybe the moment wasn't really about the other person. Maybe it was a mirror. A mirror doesn't create anything. It only reflects what is already there. Maybe that moment reflected a part of me that had been quiet for a long time, a part that still wanted connection, a part that still believed kindness mattered, a part that still wanted to be understood without having to explain every piece of itself. Maybe I had spent so much time thinking about what I wanted from another person that I had forgotten to ask what kind of person I wanted to become. That changed the way I looked at the memory. Instead of asking, why can't I stop thinking about this? I started asking, what is this showing me about myself? That question felt different. It didn't make the memory heavier. It made it meaningful because perhaps we don't always remember people simply because we want them. Sometimes we remember them because they awaken something inside us, a value, a hope, a desire, a forgotten dream, a version of ourselves we thought we had outgrown. Maybe you know what I mean. Maybe there is a moment in your own life that still visits you quietly. You don't necessarily want to go backward. You don't necessarily want to change anything. You just can't deny that something about it mattered. And perhaps that's okay. Not every meaningful memory needs to become a relationship. Not every feeling needs to become a promise. Not every connection needs to have an ending that we can predict. Sometimes a moment can simply teach us something. It can remind us what warmth feels like. It can remind us how powerful genuine presence can be. It can remind us that we still have the ability to feel deeply. And that realization can be enough. But I think there is another reason certain moments stay. Sometimes we remember how someone made us feel because we are beginning to understand what we truly value. Maybe I wasn't simply remembering a person. Maybe I was remembering a feeling of being present, of being understood, of being comfortable enough that I didn't need to perform. And that matters. Because as we grow, we begin to realize that attraction isn't everything. Words aren't everything. Appearances aren't everything. What matters is how someone makes space for you to be real. Can you breathe around them? Can you speak without rehearsing every sentence? Can you admit when you're afraid? Can you say, I don't know? Can you be quiet without feeling like the silence needs to be filled? Those questions tell us more than grand promises ever could. Maybe that's why the moment became a mirror. It showed me what I wanted to feel again. Not necessarily with the same person, not necessarily in the same way. But in my life, I wanted more honesty, more presence, more peace, more connection that didn't need to be forced. And suddenly, the memory wasn't something I needed to chase. It was something I needed to learn from. This is where everything I thought I knew changed. I began to understand that vulnerability isn't about giving someone complete access to your heart. It's about being honest enough with yourself to know what your heart is saying. And sometimes the heart doesn't say, this is your future. Sometimes it simply says, pay attention. So I paid attention. I paid attention to the things that made me feel alive, to the qualities I admired, to the kind of conversations I wanted, to the kind of presence I trusted, to the kind of love I hoped to build someday. And perhaps that is the quiet gift of an unexpected moment. It doesn't always tell you where you're going. Sometimes it simply shows you what matters. Maybe you've experienced that too. Maybe there was a moment you didn't understand at first, but later realized it had changed the way you saw yourself. Maybe that's why certain memories refuse to disappear completely. They aren't always asking us to return. Sometimes they're asking us to grow. And if that is what this moment was trying to tell me, then I don't want to ignore it. I want to carry the lesson without becoming trapped inside the memory. I want to let it remind me that my heart is still capable of being moved, still capable of trusting, still capable of hoping. And maybe one day when the right connection comes into my life, I won't recognize it because it feels like a perfect fantasy. I will recognize it because it feels honest, because it feels safe, because I don't have to become someone else to be accepted, because presence will speak louder than promises, because trust will have room to grow, and because perhaps I'll finally understand why that one unexpected moment stayed with me for so long. Not because it was necessarily the beginning of a love story, but because it was the beginning of a deeper conversation with myself. And maybe that's something worth remembering. Sometimes the moment that stays isn't the moment that changes your future. Sometimes it's the moment that changes the way you understand your heart. And perhaps that's why I never really needed to forget it. I only needed to understand it. Maybe that moment wasn't asking me to hold on to the past. Maybe it was quietly teaching me how to recognize something real in the future. And if you've ever carried a moment like that, I want you to know something. You don't have to be ashamed of it. You don't have to explain it perfectly. You don't have to turn it into something it wasn't. You can simply honor what you felt, because sometimes awareness is the first step toward trust. And sometimes vulnerability is simply the courage to say, yes, that mattered to me. I think there are moments that don't ask us to do anything. They don't demand a decision. They don't arrive with a warning. They simply happen, and then they stay somewhere inside us. And perhaps trust begins the same way, quietly, not with a promise, not with a declaration, but with a feeling that says, I can breathe here. After that moment stayed in my mind, I started thinking about what it was that had actually affected me. Was it the words? Was it the expression? Was it the silence between the words? Or was it simply the feeling of being present with someone without needing to prove anything? I think it was presence, because promises can sound beautiful, but presence is different. A promise tells you what someone hopes to do. Presence shows you what they are doing right now. And sometimes, right now is all the heart needs. Have you ever noticed how safe you can feel around someone who isn't trying to impress you? They don't need to fill every silence. They don't need to make every conversation extraordinary. They simply listen. They notice. They stay. And somehow that becomes more powerful than anything they could have promised. Maybe that's why the moment stayed with me. It reminded me that connection doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters quietly, almost unnoticed. Then, days later, you realize something inside you feels different. Maybe you've experienced that too. Maybe someone once made you feel heard without even realizing how much you needed it. Maybe they didn't say anything extraordinary. Maybe they simply paid attention, and somehow that was enough. I think we underestimate how powerful attention can be. When someone genuinely listens, they are giving you something that cannot be bought or performed. They are giving you their presence. And presence creates a kind of emotional safety. But here's the truth I've slowly learned. One meaningful moment can create curiosity. It cannot create complete trust. Trust takes time. It has to be built. It requires patience. It requires consistency. It requires us to show up again and again and again. That is why I don't want to confuse a beautiful feeling with a finished story. A moment can touch your heart without telling you what the future will be. And maybe that's healthier. Maybe we don't need to turn every meaningful feeling into certainty. Maybe we can simply allow it to be meaningful. I think that's one of the hardest lessons about connection. We want answers too quickly. We want to know what something means. We want to know where it's going. We want reassurance that what we feel will eventually become what we hope. But real trust doesn't work that way. Trust grows in the space between what we hope and what we actually experience. It grows when someone's actions continue to match their words. When kindness isn't only offered when everything is easy. When respect remains present during disagreement. When someone remembers that your feelings are real, even when they don't completely understand them, that is where trust becomes a foundation. And love needs a foundation. A beautiful house cannot stand for long if the foundation is weak. The same is true of a relationship. You can have chemistry, you can have excitement, you can have beautiful conversations, but without trust, everything begins to shake. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every delay becomes frightening. Every disagreement feels like the beginning of the end. And I don't want that kind of love. I want the kind of connection where silence doesn't automatically mean rejection, where space doesn't automatically mean distance, where disagreement doesn't automatically mean abandonment, where two people can say, "We don't agree," and still know we are safe enough to talk about this. That kind of safety doesn't happen overnight. It is built through small choices. A person keeps their word. You notice. They respect your boundary. You notice. They listen when you speak. You notice. They admit when they are wrong. You notice. They show up when life becomes difficult. You notice. Little by little, those moments become a pattern, and patterns become trust. Maybe that's what I was beginning to understand when I kept thinking about that unexpected moment. I wasn't necessarily searching for the moment itself. I was searching for the feeling behind it. The feeling of being present, the feeling of being seen, the feeling that I didn't have to perform. And perhaps that is what we should pay attention to when we meet someone. Not only how exciting they make us feel, but how safe they make us feel. Can you be honest around them? Can you say when you're hurt? Can you admit when you're afraid? Can you celebrate your own success without feeling guilty? Can you tell them what you need without fearing that your needs will become a burden? Those questions matter. Because intimacy isn't simply knowing someone's favorite things. Intimacy is knowing what makes them feel safe enough to be real, and allowing them to know the same about you. I think vulnerability and trust are connected in a way we sometimes forget. Vulnerability opens the door. Trust determines whether we feel safe leaving it open. But you don't leave the door wide open on the first day. You open it a little, you watch, you listen, you learn, and slowly, if the other person treats your heart with care, you open it a little more. That isn't fear, that's wisdom. There is nothing wrong with protecting something precious while you learn whether someone can handle it gently. And maybe you need to hear that. You don't have to give someone everything just because they made you feel something. You can feel deeply and still move slowly. You can be hopeful and still have boundaries. You can be interested and still protect your peace. You can love someone without abandoning yourself. Look at me when I say this. Healthy love does not ask you to disappear. It gives you room to become more of yourself. That's the kind of trust I would want. Not blind trust, earned trust. Not promises that sound beautiful in the moment. Actions that remain beautiful after the moment has passed, because anyone can be gentle when everything is easy. Character becomes visible when things become difficult. How someone handles frustration tells you something. How they handle your boundaries tells you something. How they speak about people who cannot offer them anything tells you something. How they treat you when they are disappointed tells you something. Those details become the language of trust. And perhaps that is why I don't want to rush the meaning of the moment that stayed with me. Maybe it was simply the beginning of awareness. A small reminder that what I truly want isn't intensity without stability. It isn't attention without understanding. It isn't romance without respect. I want something that can breathe, something that can grow, something that doesn't need constant proof because its foundation is being built every day. And if you have been hurt before, maybe you understand why that matters. When trust has been broken, even kindness can feel suspicious. You start wondering what the hidden cost is. You question motives. You protect yourself before anyone has even given you a reason to. And I don't blame you for that. A heart that has been hurt learns survival. But survival and living are not the same thing. At some point, we have to ask ourselves whether we are still protecting our hearts from the past or protecting them from the possibility of something beautiful in the future. That doesn't mean becoming careless. It means becoming wise enough to recognize the difference between caution and fear. Caution says, move slowly and pay attention. Fear says, never open the door again. I want caution without fear. I want hope without fantasy. I want love without losing myself. And perhaps you want that too. Maybe the moment that stayed in my mind was not asking me to chase it. Maybe it was teaching me what kind of presence I want to recognize when it appears again. Someone who listens, someone who respects, someone who stays honest, someone who doesn't need to make grand promises because their actions quietly speak for them, someone who understands that love isn't proven once. It is proven in the ordinary days, and maybe that's the most beautiful thing about trust. It doesn't usually announce itself. It grows quietly, like roots beneath the ground. You don't see them becoming stronger. You simply notice one day that the tree can withstand the wind. Maybe love is like that. We don't always notice trust being built. We notice it when life becomes difficult and realize we aren't standing alone. That's the kind of connection I hope for. Not something perfect, something steady. Not something loud, something honest. Not a promise that says nothing will ever change, but a presence that says, whatever changes, let's keep talking. And maybe that is what I was really looking for when that moment stayed with me. Not an answer, a direction. A reminder that if I ever build something meaningful with someone, I want to build it slowly enough that both hearts feel safe. I want to know the person beyond the first impression, beyond the beautiful moments, beyond the easy days. I want to discover who she is when life surprises her, when she is tired, when she is excited, when she is uncertain, when she is proud, when she needs space, when she needs closeness. Because real intimacy isn't knowing someone only when they're shining. It's being willing to understand the whole person. And maybe that's where the memory becomes a mirror again. It reflects the kind of love I want to create. A love where presence matters more than promises, where trust is earned instead of demanded, where vulnerability is respected instead of exploited, where two people can move slowly without feeling like they're moving nowhere, and where patience isn't a punishment, it's part of the foundation. Maybe you've been waiting for someone who makes you feel that way. If you have, I hope you don't settle for less simply because waiting becomes uncomfortable. The right kind of connection should not require you to betray yourself just to keep it. You deserve a love where your honesty has somewhere safe to land. And I want to remember that too. Because perhaps the moment that stayed with me wasn't teaching me who to choose. It was teaching me how I want to choose. With patience, with awareness, with trust, with an open heart and a steady mind. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe I don't need to know where the road leads. Maybe I just need to understand what kind of person I want to be while walking it. Because if love ever comes quietly into my life again, I want to be ready to recognize it. Not because it feels overwhelming, but because it feels honest. Not because it makes promises, but because it shows up. Not because it asks me to forget myself, but because it gives me room to become more myself. And maybe that is what trust has been trying to teach me all along. You don't have to know everything to take one honest step. You just have to feel safe enough to take the next one. Maybe timing is the part of love we understand only after we've lived through it. We want things to happen when we want them. We want clarity immediately. We want to know what a feeling means the moment we feel it. But the heart doesn't always work on our schedule. Sometimes a moment becomes meaningful only after we have had enough distance to understand what it touched inside us. That is what I think happened with me. At first, I simply remembered it. Then I started questioning it. And eventually, I began to understand it. Maybe the moment didn't become more important with time. Maybe I simply became more capable of seeing its importance. Have you ever looked back at something from your past and suddenly understood it differently? The event didn't change. You changed. Your perspective changed. Your heart learned something. Your life gave you experiences that allowed you to see an old memory through new eyes. That's the strange beauty of timing. Sometimes the answer isn't late. Sometimes we're simply not ready to understand it yet. I think patience has taught me that. There was a time when I believed waiting meant nothing was happening. If the right person wasn't there, I felt like something was missing. If the right opportunity hadn't arrived, I wondered whether I was falling behind. If a door stayed closed, I questioned whether I had done something wrong. But slowly, I began to see things differently. Maybe waiting isn't always emptiness. Sometimes waiting is preparation. Sometimes life is quietly building something inside us while nothing seems to be happening outside. And that can be difficult because growth doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like letting go. Sometimes it looks like spending time alone and learning that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Maybe you've had a season like that. A season where you wondered why things weren't moving, why the connection hadn't arrived, why the person you hoped for wasn't standing beside you yet. But what if your life wasn't standing still? What if you were becoming more patient, more aware, more honest about what you need, more capable of recognizing what is healthy and what only feels familiar because you've experienced it before? This is where everything becomes deeper for me. Because timing isn't only about when two people meet, it's about who they are when they meet. Two people can have chemistry and still not have the emotional maturity to build something lasting. Two people can care deeply and still hurt each other because they haven't learned how to communicate. Two people can want love and still be afraid of the vulnerability that love requires. So perhaps the waiting isn't only about finding someone. Perhaps it's about becoming someone who knows how to stay when something real appears. I think that's a different way of looking at patience. Patience isn't sitting beside an empty road hoping someone will eventually arrive. Patience is building your own life while keeping your heart open to possibility. You keep working, you keep dreaming. You keep laughing, you keep learning, you keep becoming, and if someone eventually walks beside you, they aren't rescuing you from an unfinished life. They're joining a life that is already moving. That matters. Because I don't want love to become an escape from myself. I want love to become an expansion of myself. I want to meet someone who has her own dreams, her own history, her own strength, her own questions, and I want to bring mine too. Then perhaps we can ask something more beautiful than, how do you complete me? We can ask, how can we help each other grow? That is a much stronger question. It creates room for ambition. Room for individuality, room for mistakes, room for change, and room for love. Maybe that's why the mirror metaphor keeps returning to me. A mirror doesn't tell you who to become. It simply allows you to see what is already there. Perhaps that unexpected moment was a mirror. It showed me a part of myself that still believed in meaningful connection. It showed me that beneath all the caution, I still wanted something real, something peaceful, something honest, something that could grow without being forced. And perhaps time was necessary for me to understand that. If I had tried to explain the feeling immediately, I might have misunderstood it. I might have turned it into fantasy. I might have expected too much from something that was simply a moment. But patience gave me another option. I could let the feeling exist without forcing it to become a conclusion. That is a kind of emotional maturity I value now. Not every feeling needs an immediate answer. Sometimes you can simply say, I feel this, and then wait, watch, listen, learn. Maybe the feeling becomes clearer, maybe it fades, maybe it transforms into something completely different. But you don't have to chase it. You don't have to force it. You don't have to turn uncertainty into fear. You can let time speak. And time has a way of revealing what urgency hides. Urgency asks, what does this mean? Patience asks, what can I learn from this? Those are very different questions. The first one wants control. The second one allows growth. And maybe that's what I needed. I needed to stop trying to control the meaning of the moment and start listening to what it was teaching me. It taught me that I want presence. It taught me that trust cannot be rushed. It taught me that vulnerability is not something to be ashamed of. It taught me that timing matters. And most importantly, it taught me that love should add meaning to my life, not become the only meaning in it. That's something I would want you to know too. If you're waiting for someone, don't stop living. If you're hoping for love, don't stop becoming. If your heart has been disappointed, don't let that disappointment convince you that your future must repeat your past. You can learn from what happened without allowing it to define everything that comes next. Maybe the person who hurt you taught you what you won't accept again. Maybe the relationship that ended taught you how important communication is. Maybe the loneliness taught you how valuable your own company can be. Maybe the waiting taught you patience. Nothing has to be wasted. Even the moments we didn't choose can sometimes become part of the wisdom we carry forward. But here's another truth. Patience doesn't mean waiting forever for someone who isn't choosing you. It doesn't mean accepting uncertainty as a permanent state. It doesn't mean ignoring your own needs. Healthy patience has boundaries. You can wait without abandoning yourself. You can care without chasing. You can hope without losing your dignity. You can leave a door open while continuing to walk forward. That's important because sometimes we romanticize waiting so much that we forget to live. I don't want that. I want a life full of movement, full of purpose, full of meaningful work, full of friendships, dreams, laughter, quiet mornings, difficult lessons, and unexpected beauty. And if love enters that life, I want it to have a place within it, not control over it. That is the kind of balance I imagine. Two people moving towards something shared while still honoring the roads that made them who they are. Maybe our paths don't need to be identical. Maybe they only need to point toward the same values. Kindness, honesty, growth, peace, trust, purpose. When those things align, two people can build something much stronger than attraction alone. They can build direction. And direction matters because life will change, dreams will evolve, circumstances will shift, people will grow. If a relationship is based only on how things feel today, it may struggle when tomorrow looks different. But if two people share a deeper purpose, they can adapt. They can say, things changed. Let's figure this out together. That's what I want. Not a love that promises everything will remain the same. A love that says, even when things change, we can keep choosing honesty. Maybe that is the patience I was learning through that memory. I wasn't being asked to hold on to a moment forever. I was being asked to understand what I wanted to carry forward. And perhaps that's the difference between nostalgia and wisdom. Nostalgia wants to return. Wisdom wants to learn. I don't want to live inside the moment that stayed in my mind. I want to understand why it stayed. I want to take the lesson then. Because maybe the purpose of a meaningful moment isn't to keep us looking backward. Maybe it is to help us recognize what we want when we look forward. And if one day another meaningful connection appears, I hope I won't rush to name it. I hope I will simply be present. I hope I will listen. I hope I will allow trust to grow naturally. I hope I will respect the timing. I hope I will remember that something real doesn't need to be forced into existence. It can unfold. Slowly, honestly, one moment at a time. Maybe that is what patience really is. Not giving up on love, not chasing love, simply becoming ready to recognize it. And perhaps the moment that stayed with me was preparing me for exactly that. Not for a particular future, but for a better understanding of myself. Because when you understand yourself, you stop asking another person to give you what you have never learned to give yourself. You stop demanding certainty. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop believing that love has to hurt to be deep, and you begin to understand that peace can be passionate too. Trust can be exciting, patience can be romantic, presence can be powerful. Maybe that's the kind of love worth waiting for. Not perfect timing, meaningful timing, not a perfect person, a willing person, not a flawless story, a shared purpose. And maybe when two people are finally ready to walk toward the same horizon, they don't need to know every step. They simply need enough trust to take the next one. So I don't regret that the moment stayed in my mind. I don't need to turn it into something bigger than it was. I don't need to make it a promise. I can simply be grateful. Grateful that something ordinary reminded me that my heart is still awake, still curious, still capable of connection, and maybe that's enough. Because sometimes timing doesn't bring us what we want when we want it. Sometimes it brings us the understanding we need before we are ready to receive what we want. And maybe that is what this moment was. A quiet lesson, a small mirror, a reminder that the heart can recognize something meaningful long before the mind knows what to call it. Maybe the real meaning of that in that moment was never about holding on to it. Maybe it was about what it awakened in me. Because the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't want to live inside one beautiful memory. I wanted to understand what that memory had revealed about the kind of connection I truly value. And I think I finally understand. I don't want a love that only feels beautiful when everything is perfect. I want a love that remains meaningful when life becomes ordinary, when the excitement becomes routine, when the days are busy, when one of us is tired, when neither of us knows exactly what to say. That's where shared purpose begins, not in grand plans, in the decision to walk in the same direction. I don't need someone to become exactly like me. I don't want that. I want someone who knows who she is, what she believes, what she dreams about, and what kind of life she wants to create. And I want to know that woman, not change her, not complete her, not possess her, know her, because there is something beautiful about loving someone without trying to rewrite them. Maybe that's what intimacy really is, not knowing every secret, but being curious enough to keep discovering someone again and again, even after years, even after familiarity arrives. Because people continue changing. You continue becoming. I continue becoming. And if we ever build a life together, I don't want to fall in love only with who you are today. I want to keep meeting the versions of you that life creates. The woman who becomes stronger. The woman who changes her dreams. The woman who discovers something new about herself. The woman who sometimes needs reassurance. The woman who sometimes needs space. The woman who laughs at things I don't understand. The woman who becomes wiser through experiences I may never fully know. I want to respect all of that because love isn't a photograph. It's a living thing. It moves, it changes, it grows. And if you try to freeze it, you lose the very thing that made it beautiful. Maybe that's why I think shared purpose matters more than having identical dreams. We don't have to want exactly the same life. We need to agree on what makes a life meaningful. We need to believe that kindness matters, that honesty matters, that family, friendship, growth, peace, and purpose matter, that we can build something without destroying ourselves in the process. That success means more than what people can see from the outside. And that love should make us stronger, not smaller. Look at me when I say this. I don't want you to sacrifice your dreams just to fit into mine. I want your dreams to have a place at the table. And I want mine to have a place beside yours. Maybe sometimes our dreams will compete for time. Maybe sometimes we will have to compromise. Maybe there will be difficult decisions. But compromise shouldn't mean one person always disappears. It should mean both people care enough to find a way forward. That is balance, not 50-50 every single day. Sometimes you will have more strength, sometimes I will, sometimes you will carry more, sometimes I will, but the direction remains shared. That's what makes partnership different from dependence. We don't need each other because we are incapable of standing alone. We choose each other because standing together makes the journey richer. And maybe that's what I was really learning from the moment that stayed with me. I wasn't looking for someone to save me from loneliness. I was beginning to understand that I wanted someone with whom I could share meaning. There is a difference. Loneliness asks for someone to fill the silence. Connection asks for someone to share the silence. That difference changed something in me because now I think about love differently. I don't want constant conversation. I want comfortable silence. I don't want endless reassurance. I want trust. I don't want someone to promise that nothing difficult will ever happen. I want someone who will sit beside me when something difficult does happen. I don't want perfection. I want presence. And maybe that's why the memory still feels important. It showed me that a small moment can reveal a very large desire. The desire to feel understood. The desire to feel safe, the desire to be present with another person without needing to perform, the desire to build something that feels like home. Home is an interesting word because home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling. It's the place where your shoulders finally relax, where you don't have to explain every silence, where you can admit you're tired, where you can celebrate without pretending, where you can fail without believing you have become a failure, where someone knows your imperfections and doesn't use them against you. That's the kind of emotional home I want to create, and I hope you want that too. But I also know something important. A home isn't built from one beautiful room. It's built from foundations, walls, doors, small repairs, daily care. Love is the same. The moment might be the doorway. Trust becomes the foundation. Presence becomes the structure. Patience becomes the patience to repair what time and life eventually test. And shared purpose becomes the reason we keep building. That's what makes a relationship sustainable. Not because nothing breaks, because both people care enough to repair what matters. Maybe that is the deepest lesson I took from that unexpected memory. I don't need to know why it stayed forever. I only need to know what it taught me. It taught me that my heart still notices genuine moments. It taught me that I still value tenderness. It taught me that I don't want to rush connection. It taught me that I want trust to grow naturally. And it taught me that sometimes the most meaningful things begin quietly, no announcement, no certainty, just a feeling, a moment, a mirror, then time, then understanding. And maybe you've had your own moment like that. Maybe you still remember something that seemed insignificant to everyone else. Maybe you have never told anyone why it mattered. Maybe you don't even fully understand it yourself. But perhaps you don't have to. Maybe you can simply ask what it revealed. What did it teach you about the kind of love you want? What did it teach you about the kind of person you want to become? What did it teach you about what your heart refuses to settle for anymore? Those questions can change your life, because sometimes a memory isn't asking you to return. It's asking you to move forward differently. That's what I want to do. Move forward differently, with more patience, more honesty, more courage, more presence. I don't want to chase every feeling. I want to understand the feelings worth honoring. I don't want to make promises too quickly. I want to build trust slowly enough that promises eventually become unnecessary. I don't want to be afraid of vulnerability. I want to become wise about where I place it. And I don't want to confuse love with losing myself. I want love to become a place where two people can remain fully themselves and still create something shared. Maybe that is the real meaning of connection. Not two people becoming one person. Two people becoming more fully themselves because they feel safe enough to grow. And maybe that is why the mirror matters. When I look at that memory now, I don't only see someone else. I see myself. I see what I was ready to feel. I see what I was still afraid to admit. I see the kind of presence I want in my life. I see the kind of love I want to give. And perhaps that is the greatest gift a meaningful moment can leave behind. It doesn't give you the future. It gives you clarity. It helps you recognize yourself. And once you recognize yourself, you can begin choosing differently. You can choose relationships that bring peace instead of confusion. You can choose honesty instead of games. You can choose consistency instead of temporary intensity. You can choose people who respect your boundaries. You can choose people who celebrate your growth. And you can become that person for someone else. That last part matters, because I don't want to sit here asking what kind of woman I hope to meet without asking what kind of man I need to become. If I want trust, I have to be trustworthy. If I want honesty, I have to be honest. If I want patience, I have to practice patience. If I want someone to listen to me, I have to learn how to listen. If I want someone to respect my dreams, I have to respect hers. Love begins with receiving, but it becomes meaningful through giving. And maybe that is the purpose behind everything I have been trying to understand. The moment stayed in my mind because it showed me something, not necessarily about another person, about me, about what I value, about what I miss, about what I hope to build, about the kind of connection I want to recognize when it appears. And now I don't feel the need to hold that moment tightly anymore. I can let it breathe. I can let it become part of my story without demanding that it become my future. Maybe that's what peace feels like. Not forgetting, not chasing, understanding, acceptance, gratitude. So if you ever find yourself carrying a moment you didn't expect to remember, don't be too quick to judge yourself. Maybe it stayed because it mattered. Maybe it stayed because it revealed something. Maybe it stayed because you were finally ready to notice a part of yourself that had been waiting quietly. And if that moment taught you what love should feel like, carry the lesson. If it taught you what trust should look like, protect that wisdom. If it taught you patience, let patience shape you. If it showed you the kind of future you want, don't wait for someone else to build it. Start becoming ready for it yourself, because shared purpose doesn't begin when two people meet. It begins when two people separately decide what kind of life they want to live. Then, if their roads cross, they have something meaningful to bring to each other. Not emptiness, not desperation, not a demand to be completed, but a life, a heart, a purpose, and a willingness to share them. Before you go, hear this one thing. Maybe the moment stayed in my mind because I wasn't meant to stay in the moment. I was meant to grow from it. I was meant to understand that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it reflects. Sometimes it leaves a small impression and lets time reveal the meaning. And perhaps the most beautiful part isn't knowing whether that moment was the beginning of something. Perhaps it's knowing that it changed the way I will recognize something meaningful when it comes again. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't need to. I only know that I want to meet tomorrow with an open heart and a grounded spirit. I want to trust without becoming careless. I want to love without losing myself. I want to dream without forgetting the person beside me. I want to build without rushing. I want to grow without pretending I already know everything. And if love finds me, I hope I am brave enough to receive it. If it asks me to be vulnerable, I hope I don't run. If it asks me to be patient, I hope I don't force it. If it asks me to grow, I hope I don't resist. And if two people ever stand together at the beginning of something real, I hope they remember that the most beautiful relationships aren't always the ones that begin with certainty. They are the ones that become meaningful through intention, through presence, through trust, through time, through choosing again and again and again. So maybe I finally understand why that moment stayed with me. It wasn't asking me to live in the past. It was showing me a direction. It was a mirror, a quiet reflection of what my heart had begun to value. And perhaps your moments have mirrors too. Perhaps something you remember is quietly telling you what you want, what you deserve, what you are ready to become. Listen to it, not with desperation, with patience. Because sometimes the heart doesn't give us answers. Sometimes it gives us a direction. And maybe that's enough. Maybe more than enough. So, wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember this. You don't have to force meaningful love. You don't have to chase what is meant to grow naturally. You don't have to turn every beautiful moment into a promise. You can simply be present. You can learn. You can become. And you can trust that what is truly meaningful will teach you something worth carrying. Maybe that is what the moment left me with. Not certainty, not a guarantee, a quiet gratitude. For the feeling, for the lesson, for the mirror, for the reminder that my heart is still capable of being surprised. And if one day another moment comes that stays in my mind longer than I expected, maybe I won't be afraid of it. Maybe I'll simply smile, I'll breathe, I'll pay attention. And I'll ask myself gently, What is this moment trying to show me? Perhaps the answer won't come immediately. That's okay. Some answers need time. Some connections need patience. Some hearts need space. And some beautiful things need to grow before we understand what they were becoming. So I will not rush the answer. I will carry the lesson. I will keep walking. And if our paths ever cross with someone who feels like home, I hope we recognize that home isn't built in a single moment. It is built slowly, with trust, with presence, with patience, with shared purpose, with two people who keep choosing to show up. And perhaps that is the quiet blessing I want to leave with you. May you never be ashamed of the moments that moved you. May you have the courage to understand them without trying to possess them. May you learn from every connection without allowing the past to control your future. May you find people who make you feel safe enough to be honest. May you become someone who offers that same safety in return. And may the moments that stay in your mind become not chains that hold you backward, but mirrors that help you see the road ahead. Because sometimes a moment doesn't stay to tell us where we belong. Sometimes it stays to remind us who we are, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is beautiful. Perhaps that is where meaning begins.